Hello everyone and welcome to my channel YNR Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The air in the Abbott mansion was thick with tension, so thick that it felt almost suffocating, as if every piece of furniture, every shadow, every photograph of past family memories was holding its breath in anticipation of the storm that was about to erupt. Phyllis, who had always been fiery, always been unafraid to speak her mind, had reached a breaking point, a moment so intense that even the most composed member of Genoa City would have flinched at the sheer force of her emotions. And it all started with Kane, whose well-intentioned attempts to keep the peace had only pushed her closer to the edge, his eyes pleading with her to calm down, to see reason, to remember that no matter what had happened, they were all family. But Phyllis's mind was consumed with betrayal, resentment, and a deep, gnawing feeling of abandonment that had been building for years, layering itself like sediment in her heart, until it finally erupted in words so sharp and cutting that they seemed to slice through the air like a knife. "I hate you. You're not my family," she shouted, her voice bouncing off the walls, reverberating through the ornate hallways, shaking pictures from the walls and rattling the chandeliers above. And for a moment Kane stood frozen, stunned, his mouth open in disbelief, unable to process the magnitude of her fury, because he knew Phyllis. He had lived with her, loved her, fought with her, and yet he had never seen her unleash a rage so raw, so unfiltered, so utterly consuming. And in that instant the room seemed to shrink around them, the walls pressing in as though the mansion itself could feel the weight of the confrontation. And even the usually unflappable Jill had stepped back, her eyes wide with shock, because she had seen fights, she had seen arguments, but nothing like this. Nothing that carried the sting of years of hurt and miscommunication packed into a single moment of explosive honesty. And as Phyllis's chest heaved, as her hands trembled with the intensity of her feelings, she turned her gaze to Kane, who had been trying to hold back his own emotions, the kind of emotions that men like him were taught to suppress, to bottle up, to never let spill over into public view. But now, confronted with the raw, piercing words of someone he loved and considered family, something inside him broke. And for the first time in a long while, Kane felt tears prickling at the corners of his eyes, his throat tightening, the familiar mask of strength and composure slipping as the truth of Phyllis's words hit him with the force of a tidal wave, and he could feel every painful syllable echoing in his mind, repeating over and over like a cruel refrain, "You're not my family, you're not my family, you're not my family." And as the tears fell unbidden, unrestrained, he felt a lifetime of effort, of trying to keep the family together, of trying to do the right thing, of putting himself last for the sake of others, crumble around him, leaving him exposed, vulnerable, human. And Phyllis, seeing the tears glistening on his cheeks, felt a flicker of something else, remorse maybe, or fear, or the realization that her words had done what she intended and perhaps more than she could control. But she could not stop now, could not retract, could not soften the blow, because too much had been bottled up, too many lies had been told. Too many times she had swallowed her anger, her disappointment, her betrayal, and now, in front of everyone, she was letting it out, unfiltered, unstoppable, raw. And as the room held its breath, everyone caught in the gravity of the moment, Phyllis continued, her voice trembling with rage and hurt intertwined, recounting moments, pointing fingers at betrayals, injustices, moments where Kane had faltered, moments where others had stepped in to shield him, moments where the family, the so-called family, had shown its true face. And with each word, each accusation, each piercing look, Kane felt the layers of his own defenses peeling away, leaving him bare and bleeding emotionally. And yet, beneath the tears, beneath the heartbreak, beneath the shock of her hatred, there was a strange clarity, a sense that this confrontation, as painful as it was necessary, that sometimes families had to face the darkest corners of their relationships, had to bring everything into the open, had to see the truth, even if that truth hurt more than any lie ever could. And as Phyllis's voice finally began to waver, as exhaustion and emotion mingled into a trembling whisper, the three words that would cut through Kane's heart like a shard of glass, the words that made him crumble entirely, fell from her lips, simple, yet devastating in their power. "You're weak, Kane." And it was as if a dam had burst inside him, years of frustration, self-doubt, and pent-up emotion flooding over him in one uncontrollable wave. Tears streaming freely now, shaking his entire body as he sank into a chair, his hands covering his face as sobs racked his frame. And Phyllis, watching him, felt the dual edge of triumph and horror, knowing she had succeeded in making her feelings known, yet horrified at the sight of Cain, a man she cared for, a man who had always tried to do right by everyone, reduced to tears in front of their shocked family, and the room was silent for a long, heavy moment, each person processing their own shock, their own guilt, their own role in the unraveling of what had once seemed unbreakable. And yet, despite the chaos, despite the pain, despite the raw, unrelenting emotion that hung like a storm cloud over everyone, there was a spark of understanding, a glimpse of the truth that perhaps sometimes confrontation, no matter how painful, was the only path to clarity, to reconciliation, to acknowledging the fractures that had been ignored for too long. And in that silence, broken only by Cain's soft, intermittent sobs, everyone in the room realized that nothing would ever be the same again, that Phyllis's words, her anger, her declaration of hatred, had shifted the foundation of their family forever, leaving wounds that would need time, patience, and effort to heal, yet also opening the possibility that honesty, no matter how brutal, might ultimately lead to something resembling forgiveness, to something resembling truth. And as Phyllis turned away, exhausted, spent, and emotionally raw, the echoes of her words still hanging in the air, Cain wiped at his tears, trying to compose himself, trying to breathe, trying to find the fragments of his dignity scattered on the floor of the Abbott mansion. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the pain, beneath the humiliation, beneath the heartbreak, there was the faintest glimmer of understanding that perhaps, just perhaps, this moment, this eruption of emotion, was the beginning of a new chapter, one where masks could fall away, where truth could be spoken, where family, in all its messy, complicated, heart-wrenching glory, could attempt to repair itself, even if it was one shattered piece at a time. And as the camera of fate panned across the room, lingering on the tear-streaked face of Cain and the exhausted, trembling figure of Phyllis, the audience was left with a sense of awe, of heartbreak, of anticipation for what would come next, because in Genoa City, nothing stayed hidden forever, nothing remained unspoken forever, and sometimes the most devastating, soul-shaking words like, "I hate you. You're not my family," were exactly what was needed to ignite a chain reaction that would forever alter the course of lives, love, and legacy, leaving viewers gripping their seats, hearts pounding, eyes wide, knowing that this was the kind of moment that defined soap opera history, that reminded everyone why they fell in love with the drama, the passion, the betrayal, and the raw, unfiltered humanity of the young and the restless. And as Cain finally lifted his head, red-eyed, raw, trembling but alive with emotion, and Phyllis sank into a chair, her own tears mingling with the remnants of fury, the audience was left to wonder. Could this family, fractured, scarred, and raw from truth, ever find a way back to each other? Or was this the moment where everything changed forever, leaving nothing but heartbreak, honesty, and the shattering echoes of three words that had brought a grown man to his knees and a woman to the edge of her own humanity? The Abbott mansion, once a sanctuary of family memories, felt more like a pressure cooker about to explode, the tension thick enough to choke anyone who dared step inside, the air vibrating with unspoken resentments, the kind that had festered for years, building slowly, invisibly, until the slightest spark could ignite a firestorm. And that spark was Phyllis, standing in the center of the grand living room, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with fury, and her hands trembling not from fear, but from the intensity of emotion she had kept bottled up for far too long, while Cain, ever the stoic, ever the peacemaker, tried desperately to maintain calm, to reassure her, to remind her that family wasn't just about shared blood or shared names. But Phyllis had already reached a point beyond reason, beyond compromise, and when she finally yelled, "I hate you. You're not my family," the words ripped through the room like a jagged blade, tearing through the fragile veneer of civility and hitting Cain with the force of 1,000 storms. And in that instant, Cain felt every ounce of exhaustion, every tear uncried, every heartache endured on behalf of this family, collapse upon him as if the universe itself had conspired to remind him that love, when unreciprocated or misunderstood, could be more painful than any physical wound. And he felt the sting of Phyllis's hatred like a punch to the chest, each word hammering at his ribcage, threatening to break him in ways he hadn't thought possible. And yet, even as the tears sprang to his eyes, even as his body shook with the effort to hold back the sobs, he couldn't help but remember all the moments that had led them here, the long nights spent trying to help her, trying to protect her, trying to keep the family intact even when she seemed determined to tear it apart. And Phyllis, seeing the effect of her words, felt a bittersweet victory, a shiver of power mixed with guilt, because she knew deep down that Cain's tears weren't just a reaction to anger, they were a reaction to truth, a recognition that perhaps he had failed, perhaps he hadn't been enough, perhaps the very family he tried to hold together had never truly understood the depth of her pain. And as her voice cracked, trembling with both rage and vulnerability, she continued, recounting moments of betrayal, of lies, of manipulation she had endured silently for years, naming names, pointing fingers, bringing to light every slight, every hurtful word, every secret kept from her. And Cain listened, each accusation like a dagger, each memory she dredged up, twisting the knife further, making him question every decision he had ever made, every compromise he had offered. And yet, even through the hurt, even through the anguish, he felt a strange, painful clarity, an understanding that sometimes family isn't perfect, that sometimes love isn't enough, that sometimes honesty, no matter how brutal, is the only thing that can cut through the deception. And then came the three words that made him finally crumble completely, the words that reduced a man who had faced business betrayals, life-threatening dangers, and family scandals to an uncontrollable, sobbing mess. "You're weak, Cain." And with those words the dam burst. All the emotions he had restrained, all the frustrations he had swallowed, all the heartbreak he had hidden behind a calm exterior, erupted in a tidal wave of tears, shaking his entire frame as he sank into the nearest chair, his hands covering his face as if shielding himself from the emotional carnage surrounding him, while Phyllis, despite her fury, felt a pang of remorse, a recognition that in wielding truth as a weapon, she had inflicted pain that might take years to mend. And the room, filled with shocked onlookers like Jill, Billy, and even the usually composed Victoria, was silent, every person frozen, unsure whether to intervene, to console, or to retreat, because they knew they were witnessing a raw, unfiltered human breakdown, the kind that was impossible to ignore, impossible to fix with apologies or rational explanations, a breakdown that laid bare the fragility of even the strongest bonds. And as Cain's sobs echoed through the mansion, Phyllis's mind flashed back to earlier moments in her life, moments when she had been dismissed, ignored, misunderstood, times when she had fought to prove herself, only to be met with doubt or indifference, and she realized that her anger today was not just about Cain, not just about this family, but about every instance of being undervalued, every betrayal, every hidden truth that had stacked itself into a mountain of resentment. And as she recalled those memories, her hands trembling, her voice wavering between rage and despair, she felt both powerful and powerless, capable of shattering the world around her yet unable to undo the damage she had inflicted. While Cain, hiding his face, thought about the countless sacrifices he had made for this family, the endless nights he had stayed awake to support, the times he had ignored his own desires to prioritize others, and now, seeing himself reduced to tears by words he never expected, he felt a complicated mix of shame, sorrow, and recognition that perhaps being strong wasn't always about holding it all in. Perhaps strength sometimes meant allowing oneself to feel, to break, to acknowledge vulnerability in a world that demanded toughness. And as he finally lifted his face, tear-streaked and raw, he met Phyllis's eyes, and in that brief, excruciating moment, they both understood the paradox of their relationship. Bound by history, by love, by shared pain, yet simultaneously divided by misunderstandings, unspoken grievances, and the inability to articulate emotions without cutting deep. And then Jill stepped forward, her presence commanding, her voice breaking the silence, trying to mediate, trying to remind them of family, of legacy, of everything at stake. But Phyllis's eyes flashed with defiance, a warning that she was not done, that the words she had spoken were not a finale but a beginning, a necessary purging of years of pent-up emotion. And as she recounted stories of past manipulations, of business betrayals involving Cain and his choices, of secrets kept from her, of the isolation she had endured even while surrounded by those who claimed to love her, the room seemed to shrink around them, every word weighted with history, every accusation a reminder that in Genoa City, no one was immune to scandal, heartbreak, or the brutal truths that sometimes had to be faced. And as she finally paused, exhausted, shaking, her chest heaving from both fury and the emotional toll of speaking her truth, Cain's sobs began to subside, replaced by a hollow, aching understanding that perhaps Phyllis's wrath was not directed at him personally, but at the system of family, expectation, and betrayal that had shaped their lives. And as the silence settled over the room like a heavy, suffocating blanket, everyone began to process the enormity of what had just transpired, realizing that this confrontation would not be forgotten, that wounds had been inflicted that might never fully heal, and yet, in the same moment, seeds of potential reconciliation were planted, because honesty, no matter how painful, was the first step toward true understanding, the first step toward rebuilding trust that had been eroded over years of misunderstandings, lies, and unspoken resentments. And as Cain wiped at his tears, attempting to regain composure, he thought about the road ahead, the need to repair not just his relationship with Phyllis, but the fractured family unit around them, and Phyllis, exhausted but resolute, recognized that her declaration of hatred, while cathartic, had consequences that would ripple through every corner of her life, affecting friendships, alliances, and the fragile web of connections that define Genoa City. And yet, she could not regret it entirely, because for the first time in years, her feelings were laid bare, undeniable, uncompromising, a testament to her humanity, her capacity for emotion, and her refusal to remain silent in the face of betrayal. And as the evening wore on, the mansion quiet except for the occasional sniffle or rustle of clothing as family members attempted to regain their composure, the reality set in. That nothing would ever be the same, that the words "I hate you, you're not my family," had irrevocably changed the dynamics of the Abbott household, forcing everyone to confront truths they might have preferred to ignore, forcing Cain to grapple with vulnerability, forcing Phyllis to confront the weight of her own actions, and forcing Genoa City itself, through its whispers and gossip, to bear witness to a drama so intense, so emotionally charged, that it would be recounted in salons, offices, and living rooms for months to come, becoming the stuff of legend in a world where secrets were currency and emotional honesty was rarer than gold. And as night descended, casting shadows over the ornate chandeliers and polished floors, Cain finally stood, shaky but determined, approaching Phyllis with cautious steps, the remnants of tears still glistening on his cheeks, offering not apology, not defense, but acknowledgement of her pain, a silent promise that despite the words spoken, despite the tears shed, despite the upheaval, he would attempt to rebuild, to understand, to be present in a way that honored both his own heart and hers. And Phyllis, meeting his gaze, saw not weakness but the complexity of love and resilience, and in that unspoken exchange, the tiniest flicker of hope ignited, fragile but undeniable, signaling that perhaps from the ashes of fury, heartbreak, and tears, a new form of connection could emerge, tempered by truth, honesty, and the raw, unfiltered reality of human emotion. And the audience, watching, reading, living through every word, every tear, every quivering lip, felt the full weight of a moment that defined soap opera drama. A moment where family, love, anger, and vulnerability collided in an unforgettable explosion of emotion, leaving everyone, characters and viewers alike, with the undeniable realization that in Genoa City, no secret could remain buried, no lie could survive forever, and no relationship, however fractured, was beyond the reach of truth, catharsis, and the redemptive power of finally, brutally, undeniably speaking one's heart. And as the night drew to a close, the mansion quiet except for the lingering echoes of Phyllis's words and Cain's tears, everyone knew without doubt that life in the Abbott family would never be the same again, because some truths once spoken change everything, and some moments once lived define generations. Even as the initial storm of emotion began to subside, the mansion remained thick with tension, every corner steeped in the residue of anger and heartbreak, and Phyllis, still trembling slightly from the intensity of her outburst, sank further into the chair, realizing that the magnitude of what she had unleashed could not be undone, that her words had pierced not only Cain's heart but the fragile illusion of family unity that had existed up to that moment. And as she stared at him, Cain, sitting opposite her, face still wet with tears, shoulders slumped but slowly regaining the quiet strength that had always defined him, she felt the paradoxical pull of guilt and triumph coiling tightly in her chest, because she had spoken the truth, raw and unfiltered. Yet she had also inflicted a wound that might fester for weeks, months, maybe years, and around them Jill, Billy, Victoria, and the others lingered in an awkward, fragile silence, unsure whether to intervene, to comfort, or simply step back and allow the catharsis to run its natural course, while Cain, finally lifting his gaze, met Phyllis's eyes, and in that quiet, tear-streaked glance, there was an unspoken dialogue of recognition and vulnerability, an acknowledgement that love, even when hurtful, demanded endurance, that family, even when fractured, required effort, and that truth, no matter how devastating, was the only path forward. And as Phyllis exhaled shakily, allowing the tension to ease just slightly, she realized that this confrontation, explosive as it had been, had also opened the door to healing, if only they were brave enough to walk through it, to confront the lingering resentments, and to rebuild their bonds not on lies, pretense, or half-truths, but on honesty, raw emotion, and the painful but liberating act of finally being seen, fully and completely, by those you loved. And as the night deepened, the mansion enveloped them in quiet reflection, every character silently considering their own roles in the chaos, every heart burdened by the knowledge that, in Genoa City, some moments of confrontation were not endings, but beginnings, the first tremors of change that could either destroy or transform a family forever. And in that quiet, Cain and Phyllis shared the faintest flicker of understanding, a fragile yet undeniable connection forged in the crucible of tears, anger, and unrelenting truth.